What if I told you that a single tank could halt the German blitzkrieg? Meet the KV-1, the Soviet heavy tank that did the impossible. As German forces stormed into the Soviet Union during Operation Barbarossa, they were stopped in their tracks by this monstrous machine. With armor that could deflect nearly every German shell and a gun capable of destroying any enemy tank, the KV-1 became a nightmare for the Wehrmacht. In this video, we'll explore the incredible history of the KV-1, its battles, and how it forced the Germans to rethink their entire tank strategy. Learn why this Soviet beast was truly unstoppable in World War II. The KV tanks, named after the Soviet defense leader Kliment Voroshilov, were a significant part of the Red Army's armored forces during World War II. They stood out due to their heavy armor, especially during the early stages of the German invasion of the Soviet Union. At times, a single KV-1 or KV-2 tank, supported by infantry, could hold back entire German formations, earning them the nickname Russian Colossus from the Germans. This was because most of the German tank guns, like those on the Panzer III and Panzer IV, were too weak to penetrate the KV's thick armor. During the initial phase of the war, the KV tanks were nearly invulnerable to the common German tank weapons of the time. The 3.7cm KBDK-36 and the short-barreled 7.5cm DK-37 guns couldn't effectively penetrate their armor, making the KV-1 a formidable opponent. It wasn't until the Germans brought out the more powerful 8.8cm flak guns that they found a reliable way to deal with these Soviet giants. Before Operation Barbarossa started in June 1941, the Soviet Union had over 22,000 tanks, with around 500 of them being KV-1 models. However, as the conflict progressed, it became clear that the KV tanks, although heavily armored, were costly and complex to produce. The more versatile T-34 medium tank proved to be a better choice for most combat situations. It offered a good balance between firepower, mobility, and production efficiency, making it more practical for the Soviets to rely on. Despite their limitations, the KV tanks played a crucial role in the development of Soviet armored tactics and technology. They served as the foundation for the later IS series of heavy tanks and self-propelled guns, which became essential in the latter stages of the war. The KV tanks might not have been perfect, but their contribution to the Soviet war effort was significant and laid the groundwork for future advancements. Development of the KV tanks. In the early days, Soviet tank designers were grappling with the disappointing performance of the multi-turreted T-35 heavy tank. This model was based on the outdated idea from the 1920s that a breakthrough tank needed heavy firepower but lacked proper armor protection and mobility. The harsh lessons of the Spanish Civil War highlighted the need for better armored vehicles, which significantly influenced Soviet tank design right before World War II. Several new designs were proposed, each featuring heavy armor, torsion bar suspension, and wide tracks. The focus was on creating more practical and effective models. One such design was the SMK, equipped with two turrets, one carrying a 76mm gun and the other a 45mm gun. However, the designers soon realized that a single turreted version would be more practical. This simplified design received approval from the highest levels, and 2 units were ordered along with a single SMK model. The smaller hull and single turret allowed the designers to reinforce the frontal and turret armor while keeping the tank's weight manageable. The KV tank was then rapidly moved from the drawing board to production. During the Winter War with Finland, the SMK, KV, and another model, the T-100, were sent to test their effectiveness in combat. The KV proved to be the best of the three, as its thick armor was almost impenetrable to Finnish anti-tank weapons. This success led to an order for 50 KVs in 1939. However, during the war, the Soviets struggled with Finnish fortifications and requested a tank equipped with a large howitzer. To meet this need quickly, they installed a 152mm howitzer on a new turret atop a KV tank, which led to the development of the KV-2 heavy artillery tank. The KV tanks first encountered German forces during the Battle of Raseiniai, shortly after the start of Operation Barbarossa. On June 23rd, over 200 German tanks advancing through Lithuania faced Soviet armor, including the KV-1 and KV-2 models. The KV's thick frontal armor could withstand most anti-tank fire, but the Germans learned to outflank them and attack from close range or use direct-fire artillery. Out of the more than 200 Soviet tanks lost at Raseiniai, 29 were KVs. Despite their strengths, the KV tanks had notable flaws. Their armor was nearly impervious to any tank-mounted weapon at the time, except at very close range, and they had good firepower and could handle soft ground well. However, they were difficult to steer, and the transmission was based on an old design that required drivers to use a sledgehammer to change gears. The visibility for the crew was also poor. At 45 tons, the KV was much heavier than other tanks of its era, limiting its maneuverability and preventing it from crossing many bridges. This extra weight became a disadvantage as more armor and features were added, making the later models slower and less agile. While the KV series provided valuable lessons for Soviet tank designers, it was ultimately overshadowed by the more versatile and effective T-34 medium tank. Further development. By 1942, German forces had introduced more effective anti-tank weapons, such as the 5cm PaK-38 and the 7.5cm PaK-40 guns. These new weapons could penetrate the KV's armor, which had previously been considered almost indestructible. To counter this, additional armor was added to the KV-1. However, even with these improvements, the tank remained vulnerable to attacks from German ground attack aircraft, like the Henschel HS-129, which used a powerful 30mm cannon. The KV-1's 76mm gun, once a formidable weapon, was now seen as less effective, especially since it was the same gun used by the more agile and less expensive T-34 tanks. By 1943, it became clear that the KV-1 struggled to penetrate the armor of the new German Tiger tank, which had significantly stronger front protection. This disadvantage, along with the KV-1's complexity and higher production costs compared to the T-34, led to its declining role on the battlefield. Despite these challenges, the KV-1 continued to be produced because of its initial success and the need for heavy tanks in the Soviet army. To streamline production, the KV-1 used the same engine and main gun as the T-34, making it easier to manufacture in large numbers. However, the KV-2, with its oversized turret designed for attacking fortified positions, was less suited for the fast-paced mobile warfare that had become the norm. Weighing in at around 52 tons and limited to only 210 units produced, the KV-2 quickly became outdated. Its size and slow speed made it difficult to maneuver, especially on rough terrain. The KV-1 continued to receive upgrades to address its shortcomings. The 1942 model, known to the Germans as the KV-1C, had much thicker armor, but this made the tank even heavier, reducing its mobility. Tank crews often complained about its poor handling and lack of a significant firepower edge over the T-34. Although the KV series had its flaws, it played a key role in Soviet tank development, paving the way for more advanced tanks like the IS series that followed. These tanks would go on to shape the outcome of many battles in the later stages of the war. KV-1S. To address the issues with the earlier KV models, the Soviets introduced the lighter KV-1S. This version had thinner armor and a smaller, lower turret to improve speed and maneuverability. The KV-1S also featured a commander's cupola with all-around vision, making it easier for the crew to observe the battlefield. A major improvement was the new planetary transmission, which increased reliability and allowed for more efficient steering compared to the older clutch and brake systems used in the Panzer III, V4, T-34, and previous KV models. This reduction in weight enabled the KV-1S to reach a top speed of about 27 miles per hour, making it faster than its predecessors. Over 1,300 units were produced before production ended in August 1943. Although many considered the KV-1S to be the best of the KV tanks, it came with some trade-offs. The lighter armor made it less durable in battle, reducing its effectiveness as a heavy tank. An attempt to equip the KV-1S with an 85mm S-31 gun led to the KV-1S-85 variant. However, this change required removing a crew member, leaving only 2 men in the turret instead of the usual 3. This loss of a dedicated commander made the tank less efficient in combat situations. As a result, the KV-1S-85 was not adopted. The Soviet heavy tank program was on the verge of being cancelled in mid-1943, as the T-34 could fulfill most of the roles that the KV tanks were designed for, but at a lower cost and with greater efficiency. The emergence of the German Panther tank in the summer of 1943 forced the Red Army to rethink its strategy. The need for tanks with more powerful guns became urgent to counter the increasing number of German Panthers and the occasional Tiger tanks. KV-85. The KV-85, also known as Object 239, was a temporary solution in the Soviet tank lineup. Essentially, it was a modified KV-1S, fitted with a new turret from the still-developing IS-85, armed with the powerful 85mm D5T gun. This gun was the same one used in the Su-85 tank destroyer and later models of the T-34-85, although those were not yet in production at the time. The 85mm gun could penetrate the armor of the German Tiger tank from about 1,000 yards, which made it a formidable opponent. However, the demand for these guns slowed down the production of the KV-85, and only 148 units were built between August and October 1943. Although the KV-85 could stand up to the German Tigers and Panthers, it was seen as a temporary measure and not a long-term solution. Its weight had increased to around 47 tons, which contradicted the initial goal of making a lighter version of the KV series. The new turret added significant weight, reducing its mobility. The Object 237, which shared many features with the KV-85, was accepted into service as the IS-85. Production of the IS-85 began in late 1943 and continued into early 1944. These tanks were deployed to the front lines starting in October 1943. However, by the spring of 1944, production of the IS-85 was halted in favor of the more powerful IS-122, later known as the IS-2, which featured a 122mm gun. The KV-85's role as a stopgap measure was crucial in the Soviet transition from the KV series to the more advanced IS series of tanks. While it provided a valuable bridge in tank development, it was ultimately produced in limited numbers and soon replaced by more capable heavy tanks designed to take on the most formidable German armor. Successor. In late 1943, a new heavy tank design entered production, evolving from the work done on the KV-13. Due to political shifts, the new tank series was named after Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, becoming known as the Iosif Stalin or IS tanks. The IS-85 prototype from the KV-13 program was approved for production as the IS-1, also referred to as Object 237. During testing, both the 100mm and 22mm guns were evaluated as potential main armaments. Ultimately, the D-25T 122mm gun was chosen because it was readily available and had a powerful high-explosive shell effective against German fortifications. This 122mm gun used a separate shell and powder charge, which slowed the rate of fire and reduced the number of shells the tank could carry. Even though the 122mm armor-piercing rounds had a lower muzzle velocity compared to the later German 7.5cm and 8.8cm guns, tests showed that it could penetrate the front armor of the German Panther tank from about 2,700 yards away. Its high-explosive shell was also capable of damaging the drive sprocket and tracks of even the heaviest German tanks and self-propelled guns. The IS-1, later renamed the IS-2, began mass production and replaced the earlier IS-85. This new tank played a crucial role in the Soviet armored forces. The 85mm gun, while effective, was better suited for the lighter Su-85 tank destroyer than the T-34-85 medium tank. The introduction of the IS-2 marked a significant step forward in Soviet heavy tank design, providing the Red Army with a vehicle that could effectively counter German armor on the battlefield. Comparison of Soviet heavy tanks. During World War II, the Soviet Union developed several heavy tanks during World War II, each designed to meet the changing demands of the battlefield. Here's a comparison of some key models. One T-35. With a crew of 11, this multi-turreted tank weighed 45 tons and was equipped with a 76mm gun. It had 5 machine guns and a gasoline engine producing 500 horsepower. Despite its impressive firepower, it was slow and heavily armored but had limited mobility, making it less effective in combat. 2. KV-1 series. The KV-1 models from 1940 to 1942 featured a crew of 5 and weighed between 45 and 52 tons. They were armed with a 76mm gun and several machine guns for secondary armament. Powered by a 600 horsepower diesel engine, they had a top speed of about 22 miles per hour and could cover up to 155 miles on roads. Their armor ranged from 1 to 3.5 inches thick, providing strong protection against most German weapons at the time. Number 3. KV-85. Introduced in 1943, the KV-85 had a crew of 5 and weighed 45 tons. It was equipped with the powerful 85mm gun, which could challenge even the formidable German Tiger tanks. The tank's diesel engine provided 600 horsepower, and it had a top speed of around 28 miles per hour with a road range of 236 miles. 4. IS-2. In 1943, the IS-2 became the main Soviet heavy tank, with a crew of 4 and weighing 44 tons. Its main weapon was the 122mm D-25T gun, capable of penetrating the thick armor of German tanks. It was supported by a 600 horsepower engine, giving it a top speed of 25 miles per hour and a road range of 149 miles. Its armor was up to 6.3 inches thick, providing excellent protection in battle. 5. IS-3. The final heavy tank in this lineup, introduced in 1945, also had a crew of 4 and weighed 46.5 tons. It featured the same 122mm gun as the IS-2, but had an even more advanced design and better armor, making it a formidable opponent in the post-war years. Combat history. In June 1941, during the Battle of Raseiniai, a KV tank, either a KV-1 or KV-2, according to different sources, made a daring advance deep behind German lines after ambushing a column of German trucks. The tank came to a halt on a soft, muddy road and was soon targeted by 4 50mm anti-tank guns from the 6th Panzer Division. Despite being hit multiple times, the KV returned fire, destroying all 4 anti-tank guns. The Germans then brought in a heavier 88mm anti-aircraft gun, positioning it around 800 yards behind the tank. However, before the crew could fire, the KV gunner knocked it out. Throughout the night, German combat engineers tried to disable the tank with satchel charges, but failed to do significant damage, although they may have compromised the tracks. By the next morning, German tanks fired at the KV from the cover of the woods, and the 88mm gun again tried to hit it from the rear. Out of several shots fired, only 2 managed to penetrate the tank's thick armor. As German infantry moved in, the KV defended itself with machine gun fire until it was finally overcome by grenades thrown into its hatches. Some accounts say the crew escaped during the night, while others claim the German soldiers buried them with full military honors. General Erhard Raus, who commanded the 6th Panzer Division's camp group, described the incident in detail. He noted that the KV, which had already been hit multiple times by the 88mm gun, was attacked again while distracted by Panzer 35 tanks. Despite being heavily damaged, the KV's turret began moving again, indicating that the crew was still inside and only stunned by the previous hits. Eventually, German pioneers managed to end the KV's resistance by dropping grenades through the holes made by the earlier shots. The German soldiers later buried the KV's crew with full military honors for their bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. Krasnogvardeysk. On August 14, 1941, as German forces pushed towards Leningrad, the vanguard of the 8th Panzer Division advanced near Krasnogvardeysk, now known as Gatchina. At that time, the only Soviet force capable of resisting them consisted of 5 well-camouflaged KV-1 tanks positioned at the edge of a swamp. Lieutenant Zinovy Kolobanov commanded one of these tanks, number 8 and 64, and led this small but determined defense unit. The geography of the area played to the Soviets' advantage. A single road passed through the swamp, providing a natural choke point. Kolobanov had thoroughly planned the defense and had his tanks loaded with double the usual ammunition, most of it armor-piercing rounds. He instructed his commanders to hold fire until he gave the order, not wanting to reveal their entire force at once. As the German tanks approached, Kolobanov's tank fired the first shot, destroying the lead German vehicle. The Germans mistakenly believed they had hit a mine and stopped their advance, giving Kolobanov a chance to take out another tank. Only after losing 2 vehicles did the Germans realize they were under attack. However, they couldn't locate the source of the fire. As they fired blindly, Kolobanov continued to pick off targets, eventually trapping the entire column by destroying the trailing tank as well. Despite correctly guessing the general direction of the Soviet fire, the Germans could only spot Kolobanov's tank. When they tried to move off the road, their tanks became bogged down in the swampy ground, making them easy targets. By the time Kolobanov's tank ran out of ammunition, it had destroyed 22 German tanks and 2 towed artillery pieces. Another KV-1 moved in and knocked out 21 more tanks before the half-hour battle ended. In total, the 5 Soviet KV-1s destroyed 43 German tanks, with 2 tanks still held in reserve. After the battle, the crew of Kolobanov's tank counted 135 hits on their vehicle, but none had penetrated its armor. For their bravery, Kolobanov was awarded the Order of Lenin, and his gunner, Usov, received the Order of the Red Banner. Despite this, Kolobanov's military career was not without controversy. After being demoted for fraternizing with the enemy during the Winter War, he continued to serve in the post-war Soviet occupation zone in East Germany, where he faced another demotion when a subordinate escaped to the British sector. Kolobanov's incredible feat was so remarkable that many doubted his story after the war. In 1980, a monument commemorating the battle was erected in the village of Novi Ukaz, at the site where Kolobanov's tank had been dug in. Since no KV-1 tanks were available, an IS-2 tank was placed there instead. This victory was a testament to the effective use of terrain and the technical superiority of the KV-1 tanks over their German counterparts, whose guns lacked the range and firepower to deal with the heavily armored Soviet tanks, and whose narrow tracks made them vulnerable in the swampy terrain. Other users' captured KV-1 tanks didn't go to waste. The Germans, for instance, repurposed these tanks and designated them as Panzerkampfwagen KVA-753R. These captured tanks were integrated into their forces, serving a new purpose on the battlefield. In Finland, 2 KV-1s, nicknamed Klimi, were also put to use. These were a Model 1941 and a Model 1942, which received some minor upgrades during their service. Remarkably, both tanks survived the war, making them unique pieces of military history for Finland. Romania also managed to capture 2 KV-1s during the conflict. The first was taken on November 1, 1942, and the second one followed in March 1944. These tanks represented valuable assets for the Romanian military, adding to their limited armored capabilities during the war. Production numbers. The production of KV tanks varied over the years. 1940, 139 KV-1 and 110 KV-2 tanks were built. 1941, production ramped up with 1,252 KV-1 and 100 KV-2 tanks. 1942, 1,802 KV-1s and 626 KV-1S models were produced, along with 127 KV-8S variants. 1943, 459 KV-1S tanks were built, along with 10 KV-8S, 148 KV-85, and 670 Su-152 self-propelled guns. In total, 3,193 KV-1s, 210 KV-2s, 185 KV-1S models, 137 KV-8S tanks, 148 KV-85s, and 670 Su-152s were produced. These numbers reflect the Soviet effort to adapt and of their tank forces throughout the war. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the history of the KV tanks and their role during World War II. From the powerful KV-1 to the rare KV-85, these tanks demonstrated the resilience and ingenuity of Soviet engineering on the battlefield. Whether repurposed by German forces, adopted by Finland, or contributing to Romania's armored strength, the KV series left a lasting impact on military history. As we've seen, these tanks not only faced some of the toughest challenges of the war, but also helped pave the way for future innovations like the IS series. If you enjoyed this look into the world of Soviet heavy tanks, please consider liking and subscribing for more content on World War II history, military technology, and the legendary machines that shaped our world. Stay tuned for more fascinating stories from the past and the untold tales of war.